presentation for today and for the conference as well. Please meet Ivan Buchta. He is the creative director of Bohemia Interactive, and he will be talking about Everon Revisited and rebooting the world of Arma Reforger. So please welcome him, and yeah, you can start right away.
Thank you. Thank you for warm welcome, Natalia, and hello everyone. It's great to be here, and it's actually provided we would see what we are talking about. Thank you very much. And it's actually the first time I'll be talking about Arma Reforger on a conference from a development point of view. It's me here, Ivan Buchta, representing Bohemia Interactive and talking about our recently released Arma Reforger, continuation of Arma series on a new technology. However, as I like to state quite often, I'm just a dwarf standing on the shoulder of giants. There's a huge work behind what I would be showing, done by my amazing colleagues at Bohemia Interactive. I may not be mentioning all the names, but it's definitely a huge cooperative effort. We did not create World of Arma Reforger from scratch. We had some legacy to answer to. So in this talk, I would like to trace and explain the process of recreating Everon, how we preserved the original features of its predecessor, which was released as part of Operation Flashpoint in 2001, how we tackled the world building and how we actually had to complete it to answer to our current needs. And last but not least, I'll show you how we applied the new lore, background, and how the whole project fructified in a very plausible game world. Speaking of myself, I started my game development career as an Operation Flashpoint modder. In 2006, I joined Bohemia Interactive after some career with environmental sciences and forestry ecology. My work appears chiefly in the Arma series, although Generous made it to DayZ as well as Livonia. I took part in development of Vigor, and also I kinda coached some of the people who did the environment tools for the both real virtuality and fusion engines. I'm really keen on nature, hiking, military history games, and recently the archery. I can recommend it to all the tired game developers in the audience. Bohemia Interactive. It's a studio which is still independent, still Czech, and it's been founded in 1999. After tremendous success with Operation Flashpoint in 2001, Arma series followed. Currently, we also support DayZ, Vigor, and Islands. We have 6 offices in Czech Republic, Prague and Brno, in Netherlands and in Thailand. We have more than 350 employees, and we are still hiring. So if you would be interested in joining us in creating such beautiful things, feel free to let us know. First, let's talk about the game for which we developed the world. Let's take a look at the basic facts and the gameplay, which is actually very important when you create a world for a game. When you design the environment, you have to be very mindful of how it is going to be used. And also, let's take a look at the Everon itself. By Arma Reforger, with severely narrowed feature set compared to our past Arma games, we want to restart Arma series on a brand new engine. It's multi-platform, it's called Enfusion, and currently the game has released on PC and Xbox. It takes place on a fictional island in the very end of the Cold War, and it features fights between US Army and Soviet Armed Forces in 2 multiplayer game modes. And as usual with Arma games, we focus a lot on authenticity. Authenticity of game rules, visual presentation, and the whole experience we are presenting to the players. The gameplay of Arma Reforger is as authentic as it gets, as we could achieve in 2 years we've been developing the game. And we did our utmost to support the military roleplay. Due to the limited scope, we are focusing on infantry and light vehicles, so you would be mostly running around with M16 or AK-74 using compass, map, and your radio. And you would be doing that in 3 game modes we presented. It's conflict, in which both sides try to capture territorial objective in the whole island. There's Game Master, which is something very similar to a 3D editor or a real-time strategy game. And it offers the whole sandbox. It's a multiplayer mission which can be curated by a player whom we can imagine as a game master. And there's a capture and hold scenarios which feature the PvP in small areas. Originally, we've developed these only to test the gunplay and movement and the very basics of the core gameplay, but the team kind of liked them, so we made them our example mods, and they are a firm part of the game. Everon Island is or first appeared in Operation Flashpoint, being one of the 3 worlds on which the game took place. Its geography is completely fictional. It's inspired by the reality of 1980s in Czechoslovakia, because we know it really well. And it tries to picture or mimic the landscape of Central Europe. So we are in the European temperate forest biome. Areas are mostly rural. You know, the islands is pretty small to our standards, just 13 by 13 kilometers, not even that. So it's kind of logical there would be just a small settlements and mostly just a mosaic of fields, meadows, and woods. But as you can see on the screenshot, it looks pretty spacious and convincing. When we started rebuilding the world, of course, first came the idea of, hey, let's use Everon, and it occurred quite independently in a few occasions, or it originated from a couple of people in the team, like what if we would use or remake one of the original Flashpoint's islands. We did it in the past with Malden Island. We recreated in Arma 3 as part of our Argo PvP game experiment. So we first really had to understand what the original was about. I used to be a very keen Operation Flashpoint player, so I knew it by heart. However, most of the team had to be acquainted with what we had on our hands. And of course, we understood that the community would have a huge sentiment for the old Everon, so we realized that we would have to be very careful not to do something really stupid to alienate people who still remember how the original Everon looked like. So we had to determine what to preserve. Original Everon, Operation Flashpoint 1995, its original morphology. The terrain is based on the heavily mutilated terrain of Kirk Island in Croatia. Original Kirk is a bit bigger, like 40 kilometers, and it's very different from what you could see in Operation Flashpoint. Apparently, it was a Czech-speaking country, because in Operation Flashpoint there are some guerrillas who speak Czech and have Czech names. Architecture, signage, woods, it all just screamed Bohemia. However, village names were French. It was naturally heavily abstracted, you know, like very, very simple thing. And as I said, community knew it in and out. Another view on the landscape of the original Flashpoint, except that in the time the game was released, the view distance would start drawing the fog around here. The top view distance was about like 800 meters. So as you can see, copying this thing was not an option. We just had to take the concept, take the general ideas, and remake it completely from scratch, reimagine it using the technology we had at hand. we also knew that many people had fond memories of Operation Flashpoint's story. You know, there were the landmarks like Helfenburg Castle, locations, the factions, the general geography would be known. So we knew that part of our goal would be to make sure the old Flashpoint veterans would feel like at home on the new terrain. After we analyzed the original, we had to define our goals. So assess how we should cater for the gameplay, identify what really would have to be preserved, do a proper research of area and setting, because, you know, like we couldn't do with just this. We would have to increase the fidelity. Like even in Arma 3, our worlds were more detailed, more thought out, came with complete history, lore, background, and lots of considerations and research went into it. So we were applying our current pipelines, not something 20 years old, but you know, the original Flashpoint team was merely trying to make some playground for some military missions. And of course, ultimately, we needed to have a very solid plan for the art and environment production. Starting with the conflict game mode, as I've mentioned, two armies are contesting the terrain. We aim to create a persistent battlefield, so players could return to the server. And besides the combat, because you are capturing big chunks of terrain, you're traveling for 4 kilometers, you are communicating using the radios and big distances. We put emphasis on the communication and the logistics. So if you are playing the conflict, this is how the in-game 2D map or topographic map looks like. Every soldier has it. And in the conflict, you can see objectives and possible links, which are determined by the radio range of radios on particular bases. And by the way, this 1 square is 1 kilometer, so you can really see that it takes some time to capture the whole island. Game Master. Game Master is a subset of our previous Arma 3 editor. In a Game Master or Curator role, you just see things in camera from above, and you have everything available. So others may be connecting to your game, to your server, and you are preparing the game for them. You can send AI their way, you can grant them vehicles, you can assign them objectives. So it means that every piece of terrain had to be prepared in some way for some kind of gameplay, for some kind of skirmish, or, for example, have always some place to respawn. So essentially, we had to make sure that the whole terrain would act well as a playing ground. And with Capture and Hold, it was pretty easy. When the guys started developing these scenarios, the map was in a fairly good shape, so they naturally opted for the most significant landmark locations to establish those short-term PvP matches there. So this furniture factory is one of the locations used by the Capture and Hold designers to house this PvP. Research. I can spend hours just showing you pictures of 1980s reality. Sometimes it's pretty hilarious. Sometimes, especially our younger colleagues were surprised. Wow, this is what 1980s was like. Or did this really exist? Or God, this is awful. Anyway, we were delving into society and culture, into the history, into architecture. Which is tremendously important for environment design. Props both for interior and exterior. Like here, this is in-game scene, and this is probably how, you know, yeah, maybe even our flat when I was a little kid was looking a bit like this. And of course, we put some effort into researching the military, but it had very little effect on Everon itself. Although one of my colleagues found a new hobby in searching for and preserving virtually some crumbling Cold War era military structures of former Czechoslovakia. So, for example, there are a couple of buildings which would only exist in the future as part of our games and nowhere else. So, just to bring you closer to the idea of how things looked like, so all the cars, nothing fancy, sometimes decades old plaster on houses, and everything looked a bit more dull, although like my personal memories are quite colorful. We also looked into the landmarks and architecture, and practically every bigger building and structure is based on some existing location, on some existing thing. So, for example, this key landmark, the castle, it was discovered by Spaniel brothers on their trips through Czech Republic. They were just hiking. This castle, Helfenburg, is set in North Bohemia, and because they took a picture of its tower, it became part of Everon in 2001, and we felt compelled to recreate the wall castle in the game. So we've visited for a couple of times, and along with plenty of other places, we successfully managed to put it in. So after some research and pre-production, we were sure about our goals. Mind you, the process were a lot more fluid and iterative, so it wasn't like we've met and suddenly we've had the goals. It didn't work like that. It was a continuous process, and I was only able to fully realize what rules we've applied only in the retrospect. So we definitely wanted to take players and just put them into 1989 Czechoslovakia of sorts. And we wanted it to be plausible, so that when they would be exploring the world, it would make sense to them. And we wanted to make it akin to our, let's say, Arma 3 standards, so with all the lore, with all the environmental storytelling, be it subtle. We also wanted to utilize the new modern technology. Enfusion Engine, state-of-the-art technology, and although we were developing it in the, along with the game, it just grants us the tools for creating immense visual fidelity, as you would see later. We decided that we have to preserve the basics of morphology, so we are still in Kirk. We decided to keep the road network more or less how it was, all the settlements, and selected landmarks. So there's this castle, there are a couple more items like the church in the central town, a couple of harbors. And we did some deviations from the original plan. For example, we invented a new village because the place was dull and we needed something to serve the gameplay, something which would serve as an objective. And we wanted to create a nice setting and communicate it well. So we were looking into possibilities to apply environmental storytelling in the assets, in the compositions. So in the end, we decided that we must not copy. There were some community remakes or ports of these old islands, and it became obvious that while they serve the community, they cannot be part of a product, and we didn't want to copy things. Instead, we recreated it. Now, we had to answer to some very tricky questions, map everyone's history, and create a plausible background which would help us to create all the art and environment design. And of course, as it's picturing a conflict happening in 1989, some fictional conflict on a fictional land, we had to come up with a plausible explanation, because according to our experience, you never know when you would need a solid explanation for something in the game. So it started as, let's be very safe and sorry, and it evolved into creating a full timeline of events. But first, the issues. No civilian populace in Arma Reforger. We simply couldn't do that. It was beyond the scope of the project. We barely started developing the whole AI system. So we originally even thought that it would be just players on the servers, no AI at all. So what would we do with this colorful world which calls for being inhabited, where there are like, traces of people, like there are, flesh trace. So no civilians. Okay, so we had to put with it, but the cardinal one was that we have a Czech-speaking country, apparently, with French toponyms. And we had to invent more toponyms and come up with plausible explanation. And both me and Scott Ellsworth, the project's narrative designer, were on the verge of panicking. But then Habsburgs helped us in 1620. In 1620, next to Prague, Habsburgs and their armies defeated, they were Catholics, they defeated the Protestant nobility of the Czech lands, causing a lot of them to leave the country, live in exile. So we decided that simply like one or two noble guys with their households would simply move to Everon or end up there. So well done, Habsburgs. Thank you, at least for something. So we created this layer of Czech exile, which would take over the island, and because Everon is a part of fictional Malden Islands, mentioned in Operation Flashpoint, organized evacuation of the civilians to nearby islands. We even had the radio Everon broadcasting from one of the nearby islands, and if you turn on the radio, you can still hear them, even commenting on the events. And then we had to delve into the history, the ancient one, why the castles are there, how the island was colonized. We had to explain, the French background as well, so French pirates, etc. And we wanted to create inspiration for the content. And of course, there was a special chapter devoted to explain the background of 1989 conflict, but it's related to our future work, so even the hints are quite subtle. We started with reviewing the geographic coordinates of Malden Islands, and Scott Ellsworth was so kind to create this Cold War print style map of Everon and the Malden Islands with Nogova from Operation Flashpoint Resistance, Malden, and about 600 kilometers there is the island of Kolgujev, where Colonel Kuba in Operation Flashpoint was waging his revolt. But what we found to be a truly good approach was creating our Everon fact book, another masterpiece by Mr. Ellsworth. He should be standing here next to me, uttering his anecdotes. It's been inspired by a CIA fact book, and it is something we first tried like 15 years ago, even as part of the development of unreleased sequel to Operation Flashpoint. CIA fact book is a yearbook released even for public by the Central Intelligence Agency, the famous spy outfit of the United States of America, and it's a very useful handbook containing geographic information, updated, so you always have like a geography, economy, politics, and practically with a dish of salt, if you follow the same pattern, you end up with a very nicely described fictional country. We did it for Generous, for Takistan in Arma 2. We did it for Altis in Arma 3, as well as for Tanoa. If you are building sort of realistic contemporary worlds, it definitely helps. Apparently I was surprised when I realized that even environment designers have studied and read it, and then they asked questions about, like, hey, what will we do with all the electricity, and how would we tackle the telephone landlines? And when we gathered all this information, we started looking into the geography, into creating the actual in-game terrain. As you can see, that we had some really nice tools at our disposal. We started working on the weather, on the sun, and other stuff like stars, skybox. Introduced the complete meteorology system in a prototype, and gradually started growing on the terrain itself. We started with the big picture. It's quite common for us to divide these fairly immense worlds, especially if you rely on the manual work, to chunks and work on particular areas. But this time, we felt that it would be very important to compartmentalize the whole terrain and introduce some zones which would be a bit different. We succeeded only partially, but we decided that we will establish concept of 3 regions. So more industrialized or developing north, wild south, and in between, in the rolling hills, agricultural and heavily forested central part. We've also classified various landscape features, like types of coastline or geology. In this case, it's an occurrence of major tree species. It was important not just because we wanted to bred some difference in each corner of the land. It was also to make sure that our environment design team does not use all the great vegetation models in all the places, that they would also approach it efficiently. And of course, we also came up with the gameplay-related guidelines, like preserve some cover and concealment, don't create too many obstacles for vehicles, and it's definitely worth it, a separate talk, and I hope our terrain lead, Ondřej Branžovský, will prepare it one day. Just to show you the early concepts we've made together with Josef Suri, Levelist, as is his nickname on ArtStation. This is how I was describing the north to him. Unfortunately, tenements did not happen. Same goes for power plant, but we didn't say our last word. We got pretty close to this image in the rural center, except we still wait for the public transportation system. And this concept covers the mountainous south together with this Helfenberg castle. Of course, it's a mashup, so in the end the scenery is slightly different, but it was great to convey the idea of the variety to the team. With the terrain, we work with the same size and landmass as in Operation Flashpoint, although the resolution got increased tremendously, so from 50 meters per cell to 2 meters per cell, allowing us to introduce a lot of natural small terrain features like ditches by the roads, various embankments, simply perfect now. Of course, we had to completely resample the terrain, smooth it out, apply erosion to make sure it looks natural, and there was a lot of manual editing involved. The screenshot here comes from, I think it's World Builder software. There are plethora of terrain generating, terrain editing softwares out in the market. This was just something that particular designer favored, and this was very initial stage of the south. Just to give you idea how it looked before. So This castle is roughly here. So really, this is what you get if you have like 50-meter terrain resolution. And last but not least, a huge game changer for us was the introduction of streams / shallow rivers and water bodies. True water bodies with a robust physics solution, so we were able to come up even with such a huge lake in the center of the Aveyron. Landscape itself was supposed to be a rural countryside, so we really had to introduce a lot of details which were never to be seen before in the original terrain. No one even dreamed about it, and the trick was to invent them in a way to look completely natural. We've trained a bit. We are gradually finding the good practices, and it's also worth a separate talk. But we've changed the forest footprints and introduced lots of these tree lines and growths according to what we, for example, seen on the street view. Actually, street view is a blessing if you are trying to recreate a decent virtual world. Along with that, infrastructure came. For example, power lines, which were laid out so that if you would have electricity one day, it could definitely function in supplying electricity from the sources to all the recipient settlements. And as a specialty of the era in Czechoslovakia, it was a huge case, in Slovakia I believe as well, collective farms. But first let me show you how we are changing the footprints of the forests. This is how the forests look in the original Operation Flashpoint. They were looking like this because they were created using the square models with plenty of trees, but as the memory management of individual trees would be like too gruesome on the real virtuality engine Operation Flashpoint, it was heavily optimized into these chunks. Since Arma 2 or Arma 1, we are depicting forests using individual trees, loading them more efficiently. So that's what we had to do. So at some point we were redrawing the footprints, breaking this regular pattern, but following the general logic. So yeah, there would be some negative space between the two outcrops of the forest. There would be forest following the valley here, but we were changing the shape as well as introducing the patches with various species composition and in various age class. And just to illustrate, collective farms in the Czechoslovakia from 1950s to 1980s, they were built as landmarks. And we follow the suit. So this is in the central Aveyron, one of the biggest ones, also fitted with this nice nice water reservoir tower, originally of Hungarian origin, and it's pretty frequent in the Czech landscape. And then let's talk about the architecture. We mostly focused on depicting or using Czech village houses. As I've mentioned, all had real counterparts. We've introduced specific things from 1970s or 80s, and along with the housing, we also wanted to create locations where people would go work in, because one of our ambitions for the future is having ambient civilian life. So, you don't want to live in a country in which everybody is just sitting home. People have to go somewhere to work and somewhere to have some fun. So we introduced the collective farms, harbors, and pubs. Settlements themselves, we always try to preserve some unique trait of each village's layout. We also had to determine the capital. The French names, they were just crazy. The most fitting place or village for capital would have been something which is read roughly, pardon my French, like Meaux, M-E-A-U-X, and you can't really pronounce it, and you can't ask Arma community and our audience to just pronounce this. Like everybody would pronounce it differently. And imagine communicating via radio where you are. I'm next to Meaux, Nevin. So we chose another one. In the end, it was one of the villages in the north, Saint-Philippe. We've also added literally a new village, Villeneuve, on the place where there was nothing before, for the benefit of the gameplay. And we've consulted the urbanism solution with Konstantinos Dimopoulos, Greek urbanist who turned game developer. He's a big level design advocate. He's into retro games, and I can recommend his video game Cities Atlas. It's a great book. So, of course, we were concepting how villages or intervalents could look like, what props we would need, and we start looking into the places. In here, I would like to show you how we approach the new village. So, Flashpoint, it is nothing here, and it's in the part of Evoron which is otherwise pretty empty, and it was feeling very repetitive. So we decided, okay, instead of this farmstead, we will just connect it with roads to provide more routes when you would be capturing the island, and we made this nice concept of how this could be. The concept was eventually turned into a prototype. You can see that this is one of the earlier builds. So we did not use details, the surfaces are so-so, and in the end this is how the area looks like in the released game, along with the nearby newly introduced power substation. So I was mentioning the urbanism consultation. Some of the layouts, some of the villages the guys came up were quite problematic, and at some point many of them were like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. So we spoke with Konstantinos, and for each village we were chatting for a very long time, and he brought a very fresh view onto settlement design. Like, for example, okay, is the population increasing, decreasing? What's the history? What's the development? Is it new? Is it old? Perfect. And in here he came with the concept of city which was probably redesigned because of this regular pattern of street network. Connects some services area, residential areas, and some outlying farms. There's also a airfield nearby with a long runway. So we were concerned how the people would be like living next to it. There are some cases. So this was just a basic zoning sketch we used as a guideline, and this is how Saint-Philippe turned out in the end. Along with getting this better and probably more accurate, we introduced some production areas here, like the factory. And thanks to the input of our Norwegian colleague, who, like, contrary to us landlubbers from Bohemia, he understands everything naval and coastline. He was able to create this beautiful, plausible harbor area. So in the end, oh, it's not Lamenten, it's, I'm sorry, it's Saint-Philippe in its final form. It's truly amazing little city. And, of course, besides the original French toponyms, we also wanted to bring the naming of particular feature of the terrain to modern standard, modern in our point of view. So we decided to preserve the original French names. For the new settlements, we also used French to be consistent, and for the other types, for example, for the mountains, you have Green Mountain. It can be localized, it can be translated, and we were drawing a lot of inspiration from local situation. So we had this fictional medieval settlement progress. So some of the toponyms were inspired by the activities which were related to the colonization. There was the naval tradition, which was really pushed by Scott Ellsworth in his narrative design role, as well as some other people in the team. Economy, like even woodcutting in the past, or we invented that this rich so a lot of mining activity in the past, and also there was this mix of our own naming combined with this question like, how would locals call it? Like what's the local story behind? That's how many local toponyms spawn in real life. We had to cater for the game as well. With the game master, or our game master team or designers came with the concept of compositions like this, assembly of objects, because when you are editing scenario on the fly, you want to be really fast in adding these more complex, prettier things. So we were adding a lot of these slots, and just by clicking on them in the editor, you can fill in a suitable thing like a roadblock, machine gun nest, field hospital, barracks. We had to make space for bases. There were some original legacy bases, part of the layout of original Flashpoint terrain, and we used them, but we used them more as objectives because they were not suitable for starting. Instead, we worked with starting in the major harbors, where we made a lot of space for plenty of these slots so you can build your base. And we are also playing with the idea of military areas with the appropriate signage. Regardless of our honest effort, we ended up with the terrain in which even developers were getting lost constantly. So, along with the map and compass, which we gradually are teaching people to use, we also maintained our practice to create signage which would help people. So when you leave or enter a village, you can see its name, and you can also use these direction signs to figure out where to go or how to go to particular places. Of course, if you are new to the terrain, it's as if you would move to a new place. It takes a while to get used to it, which I myself find rather cool. So it sets apart experienced players from the newbies. But even the new players who can operate using these map and compass can get around quite quickly. And we also had to add the spirit of the place. I really like what Chris Totten said about the open world games, comparing Elden Ring to, for example, some of the Ubisoft open worlds. There are theme park open worlds and museum open worlds. Theme parks, there are mechanics which keep you always entertained, under pressure, and the game is actively providing you with content, whereas in the museum types of worlds, it awaits your exploration, your action, and rewards only that you are moving, you are trying to find something. So we are definitely into creating the museum open world kind, but we wanted to make sure that people will be rewarded, even though our gameplay is sort of schematic and we really don't put much emphasis on some story or background. I believe it has to be there to add the depth and reward those who would be around for a longer time. There was a lot to do in this area to make the world look plausible. Landmarks, history, but also shops, brands, like pub blackboards telling you that, okay, you can have a goulash or sausage or beer. We were looking into how economy works, and we really tried to show it in the countryside. And we also worked a lot on the flavor art, like starting with the pictures of president of Everon Socialist Republic in the government offices, leaflets, warnings, and military compositions, which you can see only when you play Conflict. Speaking of monuments, it's one of the great examples. We built a monument to guerrilla fighters from 1985. So, it's 4 years later in the game, and definitely the people of Everon are honoring their fallen heroes. Scott also invented fictional visit of completely real Jan Neruda, famous Czech 19th century writer, journalist, and the poet. Actually, one of his poems inspired us for the lyrics of Everon Anthem. I won't sing it, I promise. And of course, Everon sent their men to the Western Front in the World War I. So there are these subtle monuments scattered across the landscape on some natural places, fairly inconspicuous, waiting to be found. We had to invent the state symbols. We soon ditched this original guerrilla flag, which was the only flag we knew about related to Everon from Operation Flashpoint. So we iterated the new design, and based on it, we also invented the coat of arms. Yeah, and of course, Anthem. We still wait for the music. Flag itself, it's always a big thing, and we actually apply a lot of real vexillology rules. Rule of thumb: if you are making a game terrain's flag, it's good to invent it so simply that everybody in the team can reproduce it. So in this case, this is one of the interim stages. There were more sets of pictures like this. In the end, we settled on the lozeng, and this is the final form, even with like a symbology of the colors, 3 major harbors. By the way, the lozeng is one of the shapes which is pretty frequent on the French colonial flags. So that's why Scott took it, and then we were really creative with that. Originally, we tried to apply the original concept. Also, in the military symbology, you have blue for friendlies, red for enemies, and green for locals, for the third faction. In Arma, we always had like a blue for Op 4 and the third indigenous force, neutrals. So I originally was pressing a lot for the green, but it didn't work. So there we go. Coat of arms. Again, a lot of iterations, lots of motifs, even chalice, typical for Czech Protestants. Dates back to the Hussite rebellion. French lilies, and the goat, because, in Arma 2, Everon was mentioned as a place where you can get a really good goat cheese. In the end, flag served us as a perfect inspiration. And brands and logos, it's no small thing. So, well, Czech company, let me start with the beer brands which are offered in the pubs of Everon. We even honored our chief financial officer and co-owner of the company by his own beer brand, Slava. These cargo containers are still a way to be implemented, but in here we partly resorted to the parodies of some existing shipping companies, partly invented some companies ourselves. You can see this logo also on some of the offices. Everon State Forests, a company which is managing the forests of Everon, and naturally they have their own sawmill and logo. And eventually we will add the civilian variants of the trucks. Arma Beton, concrete mixing plant, or remix of the famous Czech state-owned Benzina brand. You can still see it, it's part of the Orlen Group. So we decided to remix it a bit. or remix of another famous Czechoslovak Cold War era brand for the car services. And when all the day's job is done, you can always unwind in the progress bar in downtown San Philip. We actually have a plenty of custom pop signs, and it was a great chance to immortalize some of the team members. So if you would be in more, don't forget to drop in at the pub Ucheperu, named after one of the map designers, just for example. Radio Everon started like a experiment, but it evolved because, of course, it's a fun stuff. So our sound designers and coders ended up scattering radios in the environment. You can turn it on, and when you turn it on, you can actually hear the news explaining a bit of the lore, like pertaining to the 1989 events. So, the whole population moved to other islands, and tension is arising, fights are going on Everon. Everon Broadcasting has its own poster, which is present in the game world and also in our offices. And we have two soundtracks. One soundtrack, nice classical ambient tunes, which you can hear in the game, and another one just for the radio, featuring some fairly known and sometimes fairly unknown musical artist with a thing for the 1980s synth pop. Some songs are truly over the top, but it adds greatly to the whole experience. And when you really want to freak someone out, you start turning on radios in the villages when there's other side capturing it, so they become quite nervous. We are arriving to the end of my talk, so let's take a look at the process, how we did. I have to stress that we did a very good thing by predefining this whole background and lore, because we created like a very stable platform. So if environment team needed to invent something, they were following the suit, they were understanding the background, and they were not deviating from it much. It was great inspiration for them. For some of the locations were created based on the fact that someone wrote, okay, and there was some mining occurring in the past in like 18th century in the south of Everon. Wow. Working with the technology which is currently developed is truly mixed blessing, and I mean it in a very positive way. Of course, it can sometimes get very unstable, but we had great opportunity to get some solutions tailored specifically for our needs. In reality, as I've already mentioned, this whole process was very iterative and far less fluent and organized, but as we started with a good definition of what we want and it proved pretty stable, it was all right. And of course, some items, power plant, cargo container brands, and a lot more did not make it yet. So you still have some to look forward to. The reboot of the terrain was very successful because community veterans love it, accept it, appreciate it. New technology truly shines. The new terrain is very plausible, like both from the geographical point of view and also the way we were able to present it as a fictional island state. It works, and above all, it serves its purpose. Like when you move through the terrain, there's enough cover and concealment. There are roads to move on everywhere. You can find your way. There are landmarks to aid your navigation. So I think our environment design eventually did a really great job. And to actually prove my words, let me show you some comparison shots. So let's start with some basic open rural landscape, then and now, along with the collective farm serving as a local landmark for this whole area, and the pond logically placed in the depression. You can see that there's a lot of additional structure this is how the Central European landscape really looks like, because it's been used for centuries, or thousands of years. Another place, how it looked like from a close-up during the prototyping, and the final thing after we introduced the various field types and worked on the details. Okay, nothing here, right? So just boring, uninteresting, but it was asking for it, so we ended up creating a lake. We did hydrological analysis of the terrain, and this place turned out to be a sink. So what would we do with it? So lake it was. And Lamenten, which was always meant to be a historical site, even like a castle town, you know, enclosed by the battlements and medieval fortifications, allegedly, according to Marek Spaniel. It was never too apparent in Operation Flashpoint, but we did our best. So we added anchorage, which could be used even in the medieval ages, and there are some remnants of the fortifications not visible here, but just completely new structure of everything. Moreton Bay, the first place on Acheron in which you land in Operation Flashpoint, we expected that a lot of people will be very interested in how it would look like, and this is how it looks like now. Coastline is partly inspired by my findings of old Soviet bunkers in Estonia. More. So there you go. Jan Čepera did a tremendous job in turning it to a very cool little anchorage and well-structured little village with remnants of this like individual stripes belonging to particular farms, which is something we've learned about while studying the real-life Bohemian villages. And St. Philip, like it was just a church, nothing more, and the runway. Voila, we've already seen it before. This is how it evolved. Regina, the small village with a sawmill and just completely new mountains and stuff. And the Montfort Castle, as we had to invent the proper names, with the Saint-Pierre down in the valley. And this is what the new possibilities of terrain allowed us to do with that. In here, we were very careful about distribution of the forest versus the arable land. And of course, it all reaches beyond the game. So we use our brands for creating merchandise, office decorations, and in 1980 style, we even did our announcement stream. Thank you for your attention, and as we've run out of time, I would like to ask you to ask me questions only after the talk. I'll be at your disposal outside.
Yeah, thanks a lot. A very cool talk, and it was really exciting to listen to about all of this. So yeah, feel free to connect to Ivan and ask him questions afterwards. And now we will be having a closing ceremony here, where we'll learn about the award winners. So yeah, you can stay here, and we will continue right away.
So thanks again for your attention. Hope you had fun, and hope you'll find this game interesting. Thank you.